President of Iceland, Dr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, Ambassador Anton Vasiliev from the Russian Federation, Chen Laiping, chargé d'affaires from the Embassy of the People's Republic of China, and Marit Lillealtern, chargé d'affaires from the Embassy of Norway. Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this symposium, which is the second symposium on the China-Nordic Arctic Research Cooperation, held here in this beautiful town of Akureyri, the capital of the north, as they like to call it, situated only 60 kilometers south of the polar circle. Part of the constituency here is the Hallgrímur, which is sitting astride on the polar circle, actually. All welcome, and thank you for last night, for those who joined us in the inauguration on the Aurora Observatory. The China-Nordic Arctic Research Center was established in Shanghai on the 10th of December 2013 by 10 member institutes, 4 from China and 6 Nordic institutions. They all have the capacities and the influence to coordinate Arctic research. The China-Nordic Arctic Research Cooperation purpose is to provide a platform for academic cooperation, to increase the awareness and understanding and knowledge of the Arctic in a global context, and as well to promote the cooperation of sustainable development of the Nordic Arctic and coherent development of China in the global context. It was a pleasure to participate in the inauguration ceremony in Shanghai in December last year, as well as participating in the first assembly meeting in the beautiful and historical town of Zhongzhou city, which is on the lower reaches of the Yangtze River and on the shores of Lake Taihu. And we actually had the opportunity to visit a beautiful garden, the garden of humble administrators garden. The China-Nordic Arctic Cooperation will undertake activities such as joint research projects, grant fellowships, and conduct an annual symposium like we are having today. The first symposium was hosted by the Polar Research Institute in China in June 2013 in Shanghai. And now it's the second term, a year later, actually. The China-Nordic Arctic Research Cooperation is composed of an assembly of member institutes, a director, and a secretariat. The assembly is formed by representatives from each institute and operates on consensus. The chair of the assembly is Chinese representative, while the co-chairs are from the Nordic member institutes. The research themes which are on the agenda for this cooperation is Arctic climate change and impacts, Arctic resources and shipping and economic cooperation, as well as Arctic policy making and legislation. Those are the main priorities, but they can be broadened. The research priorities cover both natural and social sciences and are open towards the multidisciplinary research. It was especially discussed at the Assembly the importance not only to understand the natural sciences, but not least to integrate the physical sciences with the social sciences and humanities. The Assembly intends to work further on the research priorities in the next years. It's also agreed to define better what we mean by Arctic in this respect, Nordic Arctic in this respect. To mention a few things, the Assembly has taken up at its first meeting was to work on a book having the working title Understanding the Nordic Arctic Interests and Policies, preferably being suitable for a relatively wide audience, and as a foundation for the China-Nordic Arctic Research Cooperation, but possibly a later book on the Nordic Arctic, which we hope to be more theoretical or academic in its scope, actually. There will as well be offered fellowships and scholars or internships in this respect, actually. It's obvious that in this joint cooperation between the Nordic countries and China, we are in the early phases of this cooperation. It must be said that all the preparation and the progress we have made have been very successful, and that leaves room for optimism for further development of this kind of cooperation. China is a fast-growing economy and becoming a world-leading one, still not an Arctic state, but the cooperation with the Nordic states, which are together a population of 26 million, but again, if we count them together, they are the 10th largest economy in the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know that we have an interesting days ahead of us discussing the North meets the East under that title, covering different topics in the presentations. There are three things I would like to, before I finish, to mention here. One is that the meeting will be recorded, so if you are against that, you have to let us know. Second announcement is to have the slides up on the computer here in time during the next break, actually, and there will be a group photo taken during the coffee break as well. So this is the practical things I have to mention. So, ladies and gentlemen, the President of Iceland, Dr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, please.
Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Skarphéðinsson, scientists and participants, let me welcome you all to this symposium and express my pleasure at witnessing how the progress has moved forward in a formidable and impressive way. It is only 4 years since I visited the Polar Institute headquarters in Shanghai and had the opportunities to discuss with then Vice President Xi the possibilities of bringing scientists and others interested in the future of the Arctic from not only my own country but also our Nordic friends and Chinese scientists and distinguished participants in Arctic affairs, bring them together in a new level of cooperation which demonstrated the growing global significance and importance of the Arctic. And it was in those meetings that the idea of inviting the Snow Dragon, the research vessel, to arrive in Iceland after having sailed along the northern sea route, and thus bringing a formidable gathering of young Chinese scientists to my country, and in this way consolidate the beginning of this cooperation. And at an open public forum hosted by the University of Iceland during the stay of the Snow Dragon in Reykjavik, leading scientists from the Polar Institute expressed the reach of their research and their findings, both with regard to the melting of the Arctic sea ice and the extreme weather patterns in China, and as well the consequences of the melting of the Greenland ice sheet and Antarctica for the rising sea levels and the future of cities in China. And I have in many speeches in Europe, in the United States and elsewhere described this experience of welcoming this formidable community of young Chinese scientists to Iceland and listening to their presentation on the correlation between the melting of the ice in our part of the world and the destruction due to extreme weather patterns in China, and how, in fact, the future of China was linked in a strong way to what happens in our Arctic neighborhood. For me, it was an historic moment. It was the manifestation of how, wherever we live in the world, the future of the ice-covered areas is a fundamental part of what we are going to offer our children and their grandchildren with respect to planet Earth. And in the 2 years that have passed since, not yet 2 years, in fact, will be later this summer, this cooperation has moved forward, as we are witnessing here today and did in Shanghai last year, in a fascinating and productive way, demonstrating not just to us from the Nordic countries and from China, but for all of those who are concerned and interested in the future of the Arctic and the world as a whole, that despite the distances, the political barriers, and other hindrances, we can come together in a very effective, practical, cooperative coalition where science leads the way. And that is a very important element in this cooperation, not just now and in the coming years, but also historically. The Arctic cooperation is founded fundamentally on the leadership provided by Arctic scientists in previous decades. Even during the Cold War, it were scientists from the Western countries, the Nordic countries and Russia that prepared the ground for the effective cooperation which later became the Arctic Council. And it is to me extremely encouraging to see that both China, Russia, South Korea, United States, France, to mention a few of the partners in this new global Arctic cooperation, all agree that science must be the leading force of our growing cooperation. That was the message which President Putin presented in the Arctic conferences in Russia, not just last year, but also in the previous 2 years. And that was also the message I received 2 weeks ago in a letter from the President of China, Xi Jinping, where he wrote to me to express not only his support and the commitment for the cooperations we are celebrating here today, but for a wider involvement of Chinese scientists, policymakers, and business leaders in the broad Arctic cooperation which we have been constructing in recent years, for example, in the assemblies of the Arctic Circle, which came together in Reykjavik last year and will again meet in our capital at the end of October. And within the United States, we are seeing, and I was able to observe that last month in wide-ranging discussions I had in a number of American cities, that the significance of science in the Arctic cooperation is the leading force of the United States involvement. I've mentioned this here today because often when I meet people from other parts of the world to talk about the Arctic, there are many who have this notion that there are inherent conflicts. There are on the horizon insurmountable problems and conflicts of interest. And then the description of the scientific cooperation, the active and already very strong scientific cooperation, is the most important answer. And that is why I believe this symposium here today is not only important for the various topics that you're going to discuss, but it also sends a very significant signal to all of those who now want to engage in the Arctic cooperation. We are all aware that last year, when the ministerial meeting of the Arctic Council approved a group of new observer states to the Arctic table, that from now on, more than half of the G20 countries will in one way or another be involved in the Arctic cooperation. Of course, we don't know yet how this will be mapped out, what in practice will be the involvement of Japan, South Korea, Singapore, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, as well as others. We know that in addition to those, countries like Mexico, Brazil, the United Arab Emirates, and others are actively considering to apply for a similar observer status. We face the possibility that within a few years, the Arctic Council would once again have to come together and make a decision. How broad would be the Arctic table in terms of states accepted? And in that dialogue, I think the most important question should be to those countries that have now been accepted to the Arctic table, even as observer state, but also to others. What will be your scientific contribution? How are you going to participate in the search for knowledge and the monitoring, the scientific monitoring of the Arctic future? The test case of their involvement in the Arctic cooperation should not be economic interest or political significance, but the clear, constructive, and real scientific cooperation. And in that respect, the Nordic China-Arctic Research Center and Cooperation, the Symposium in Shanghai last year and the gathering here in Akureyri today and tomorrow, is of great significance, because it is already providing a model of what we can do together, and how we can in fact construct that model and make it effective in a relatively short time. If anybody had told me 4 years ago, when I heard these preliminary notions during my visit to China, in discussions both with the leaders of the country as well as the scientists in the China Polar Institute, that 4 years later we would have achieved all of this. We would have brought this effectively about. We would have welcomed the snow dragon to Iceland. We would have established an observatory which was inaugurated yesterday. And we would be actively mapping out our cooperation in many different areas. I will confess to you that although I am an incurable optimist, I would not have believed it to be possible. And having 2 weeks ago received this significant letter from the President of China, I realized that this cooperation is not just driven by the interest of the scientific community. It also comes with a strong leadership at the highest levels in China. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is based on my discussions in the last 6 years or so with the now President of China, is that both he and others realize that what happened to the environment in China, what happens in the weather patterns and the rising sea levels and the frequency of extreme weathers, will have more fundamental economic consequences for the Chinese economy, the people of China in the different regions and towns and villages, than perhaps most of the policies that are being formulated by the new leadership. Such is the force of the ice-covered regions. Such is the relationship between the ice in our part of the world and the economic and the social future of China. So any responsible president of China must take a strong interest in what happens to the ice in the Arctic. In addition, I want to reiterate also here this morning that we should be aware that the success of the Arctic cooperation, both the success that we have built among the 8 Arctic states, as well as in recent years in partnership with other countries, the success of the Arctic cooperation is increasingly becoming a model of inspiration for the nations in the Himalayan regions. A region which is also rich in glaciers, but will perhaps be more dramatically affected sooner by the melting of those glaciers than we will be here in the Arctic. And yet, up to now, India, China, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, and the others have not been fortunate enough to come together on as productive, close, and trustworthy cooperation on the glaciers and the ice in their part of the world as we have on the ice and the glaciers in our part of the world. And as I said somewhat humorously to my friends in both the Indian government and the Chinese leadership in the last 2 years, now we have the paradoxical situation that China and India are more involved in cooperation on the Arctic in our part of the world than they are in cooperation on the glaciers and the ice in their part of the world. So, to me, an additional mission of what we are doing here today and what we will be doing in the years to come in the Nordic-China Arctic cooperation is also to demonstrate to the people and the powers and the nations and the scientific communities in the Himalayan regions that we can indeed come together to study and discuss the relationship between people and ice, both in the Arctic and the Himalayas. That is the global significance of this cooperation. So I want to thank our friends from the Polar Institute in China and all of those from the Nordic countries and elsewhere who have come together. I also welcome especially ambassadors and representatives from the other Arctic states who have come here today to be with us in this discussion, because truly this must be not a narrow dialogue of a few countries, but a broad cooperation where everybody is welcome. And on behalf of the newly established Arctic Circle, I would close by inviting all of you or those representing the symposium to report to the Second Assembly that will come together in Reykjavik at the end of October, beginning of November, to report on the conclusions of the Nordic China-Arctic Symposium and on the next steps in this cooperation. Because it is of great interest to all of those who will come together under the Arctic Circle umbrella in the fall to be able to follow this extraordinary path-breaking cooperation that has been created by all of you. So I wish you well. I welcome you to Iceland, and I'm extremely pleased to see how ideas come into reality in this cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, for giving us the global perspective. Next on the agenda is Chen Laiping, who is chargé d'affaires of the Embassy of the People's Republic of China. Please, the floor is yours.
Your Excellency, President Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, Your Excellencies, Mr. Hallgrímur Jónasson, Dr. Yang Huigen, distinguished guests. It's my great honor to be invited to attend this second China-Nordic Cooperation Symposium held at this beautiful campus of University of Akureyri. On behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Embassy in Iceland, I would like to extend our warm congratulations to this symposium and my sincere thanks to the organizers, RANNIS, and the China-Nordic Arctic Research Center. China attaches great importance to the development of relations with the Nordic countries. With developed economies and societies and high level of integration, the Nordic countries have unique influence and advantages in Europe and the world. The bilateral and sub-regional cooperation between China and Nordic countries enjoy both solid foundation and favorable realistic conditions, in which the Arctic cooperation is one of all important fields. It is evident that China obtained a strong support from the Nordic countries when it applied to become the accredited observer of the Arctic Council. The two sides have conducted effective communication and cooperation within the Arctic Council and other multilateral frameworks. Since the first China-Nordic Arctic Cooperation Symposium held in Shanghai last June, exchanges and pragmatic cooperation on Arctic affairs between China and Nordic nations have been deepened. After the China-Nordic Arctic Research Center was initiated in Shanghai last December, 10 research institutes from China and 5 Nordic countries have used this trans-regional and interdisciplinary platform of research and communication to jointly make studies on Arctic issues and share information, which promoted mutual relations and cooperation. On February of this year, China and Denmark, for the first time, held a meeting specially on Arctic affairs and reached broad consensus in the fields of Arctic policies and cooperation. China has sent many times its personnel to participate in Arctic meetings organized by the Nordic countries, including the first Arctic Circle Assembly held in Iceland on last October. The meeting and the task force to facilitate the creation of Circumpolar Economic Forum from the Arctic Council last December in Finland. The meeting and Arctic Council on the Task Force for Action on Black Carbon and Methane held in Sweden on last December, and Arctic Frontier meeting in Norway on last January. Just yesterday, we witnessed the foundation laying for the China-Iceland Joint Aurora Observatory, which effectively implemented the consensus of framework agreement between the Chinese and Icelandic governments on Arctic cooperation. I hereby express our congratulations also. The theme of this symposium is North meets East. In a era of globalization, transportation, communication, and IT technologies and others are highly developed, and our planet is becoming smaller and smaller. All countries in the world are interdependent and jointly developing. What happens in the North affects the East, and vice versa. It is also true to the Arctic Pearl. Natural changes, just as Your Excellency, Mr. President mentioned, natural changes and economic explorations in Arctic area should bring significant impacts on climate, eco-environment, agricultural production, social and economic development to China and other Arctic nearing nations. Only if the North and the South, the East and the West, the Arctic nations and non-Arctic nations do work together to have deep understanding and more knowledge about the Arctic, shoulder responsibilities on Arctic environment protection, can we effectively solve trans-regional issues on the Arctic, such as climate change and international shipping, so as to achieve the sustainable development in the Arctic area. The Nordic nations have a long tradition of respecting nature and protecting environment. China has also the culture of harmony between man and nature. The ancient Chinese philosopher, the founder of Taoism, Lao Tzu, once said, "The Tao means the way, follows the nature." Our ancient Chinese people believe that a true man loves mountains, while a wise man enjoys rivers, which manifests the spirit of learning from nature. These thoughts form ethical and cultural foundations for China-Nordic Arctic cooperation. The Nordic countries have unique and rich experience on Arctic scientific research, environmental protection, involvement, innovation, and the others. On the other hand, the indigenous people in the Arctic have a precious local and traditional knowledge. China's participations in Arctic affairs cannot be done without cooperation with the Arctic nations, inclusive of Nordic countries. Under this guiding principle, China actively have got involved in exchanges and cooperation on the Arctic fields with the Arctic nations, sent several Chinese experts to participate in the research of relevant projects in the working groups of the Arctic Council, the aims of which are to deepen understanding and have more knowledge on the Arctic, and to make contributions to the sustainable development of the Arctic region. I know that this symposium covers extensive topics, from the Arctic policy to the Arctic governance, from the Arctic sea route to the exploitation of fishery and other resources. All these topics are correspondent to the important situation of the Arctic development that exploitation and utilization of the Arctic region has been high on the agenda and increasingly become the focus of attention of all players. The Arctic nations and non-Arctic nations complement each other distinctly in areas of navigation, resources, infrastructure, and trade. there also exist both great potentialities for cooperation and a prosperous future of mutual benefits. The Arctic Economic Council, which will be soon established, will focus on discussions on exploitation and utilization of the Arctic region. We hope the Arctic nations, including the Nordic countries, will continue to keep its openness and inclusiveness, accept stakeholders such as business circles from non-Arctic countries to attend, and last, jointly advance the Arctic development. Ladies and gentlemen, Iceland holds a unique geographical position with its location in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. And it is an important hub in the ocean and a gateway to the Arctic. President Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson and the Icelandic government pay high attention to China-Iceland relations and bilateral cooperation on the Arctic. The Arctic cooperation constitutes an important part of Sino-Icelandic relations. Mr. President has made great efforts and contributed a lot to the bilateral Arctic cooperation. During his visit to China in 2010, he went to the Polar Research Institute of China. Later, he warmly invited the Chinese side to attend the first Arctic Circle Assembly held in Reykjavik last October. In a letter, a reply from President Xi Jinping of China, President Xi Jinping says that President Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson is an old friend of the Chinese people. Today, people from political, academic, and business circles of China and the Nordic nations gather here to and offer your opinions on Arctic policy and governance, Arctic economic development, and other issues, to contribute your intelligence to the promotion of Arctic governance. We are convinced that this symposium will achieve abundant fruits. Wish you a big success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chen Laiping, for the Chinese perspectives. Next, I would like to invite Marit Lillealtern, who is chargé d'affaires of the Embassy of Norway. Please.
Thank you. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the 4 Nordic embassies here on Iceland, I am pleased to address the opening of the second China-Nordic Arctic Cooperation Symposium. The Arctic is gaining increasing international interest due both to challenges relating to climate change and to the emerging possibilities of business development. Arctic cooperation is characterized by a low level of conflict and wide mutual understanding, and so it should remain. All activities and cooperation in the Arctic must be based upon the rules of international law, including the law of Sea Convention, other UN conventions, and other international agreements. The governments of Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, consisting of Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands, wish to focus on issues that contribute to a sustainable development of the Arctic environment, while at the same time creating conditions to maintain good cooperation between the Arctic states and with the indigenous peoples of the region, as does, of course, Iceland, our host here today. We wish to lay the foundation for business development based on Arctic resources. Improving infrastructure and strengthening environmental preparedness as well as search and rescue capacity are necessary to this effect. It is important to grasp the opportunities nature provides in a sustainable and responsible way, and to ensure that the Arctic remains a peaceful region of international cooperation. And the Nordic countries are actively seeking to engage both Arctic and non-Arctic stakeholders in this cooperation. The Arctic Council is the primary forum for discussing Arctic affairs, and its international position has been considerably strengthened. Observer status to the 6 new non-Arctic states is part of that strengthening, and we hope to soon be able to welcome the European Union in as well. We look forward to increasing cooperation with all the observer states, both bilaterally and in the Arctic Council. We welcome China's interest and active participation in the Arctic Council and its working groups as a country with highly relevant expertise, experience and knowledge, and with legitimate aspirations to take part in responsible economic development in the Arctic. In concluding, let me congratulate China and Iceland for doing the preparatory work and for launching the China-Nordic Arctic Research Cooperation jointly with the other Nordic countries. You have created a forum for mutual learning and problem solving between the Nordic countries and China that holds great promise. It is our hope that this meeting in Akureyri will sustain networks and contribute concrete insights to Arctic policymakers and industry players. On behalf of the ambassadors of Denmark, Sweden, Finland and Norway to Iceland, I would like to wish you all a successful and productive conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Marit, for the Nordic perspective. And finally, we have an address from Anton Vasiliev from the Embassy of the Russian Federation. Please.
President Grímsson, Mr. Hallgrímur Jónasson,尊敬的Chen先生, dear colleagues and friends, I have a very brief words of welcome here. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for a very kind invitation to the second China-Nordic Arctic Symposium. It was my honor to be present at the first inaugural symposium in Shanghai last year, and that has left very good memories in me. I'm here now in my new capacity of Ambassador of the Russian Federation to the Republic of Iceland. And I have left the Arctic Council to the able hands of my successor, Ambassador Vladimir Barbin, but I have not left the Arctic. For Russia, Arctic is its home and its future. Russia is enjoying excellent relations with Iceland and the Nordic countries, the Nordic world. In the same way, China is the strategic partner of the Russian Federation, and in this way, Russia is nothing else but a very natural, huge, but very reliable bridge between the two, between China and the Nordic world. Arctic is undergoing a very fast changes that bring new opportunities and new challenges, and it's very important that these challenges and opportunities are taken by the Arctic states as a source of enhancement of cooperation, enhancement of trust, and enhancement of practical deeds. And these changes has changed the face of the Arctic, and the Arctic now is one of the most stable and most predictable areas in the world. And I agree with President Grímsson, an example to many other less stable regions of this world. We enjoy an excellent cooperation in the Arctic, but the potential of this cooperation is enormous. And it is based on the very simple fact that the Arctic states share the basic national interests in the Arctic. And you can see it if you compare the national Arctic strategies of the 8 Arctic states. And these interests are very clearly assuring the safety, the sovereignty of the Arctic, assuring the right balance between the economic exploitation of the resources and transportation route of the Arctic, and sustaining the ecology and the interests of indigenous peoples. This interest of support of the development of the North, which cannot be assured without the help of the capitals and the central government and the central budget. and the common need for more scientific research and more scientific awareness and understanding of the changes that take place in the Arctic. But most importantly, the common interest of all of the Arctic states is that all these above-mentioned national interests could be fully realized only through very close cooperation with the Arctic partners. Of course, there are problems remaining in the Arctic, but the general trend is very positive. We are not having more problems in the Arctic. We have less and less problems in the Arctic. And problems in the Arctic that remain, among the Arctic states that remain from the past are being solved by the cooperative efforts by the states through negotiations and cooperations. There are many examples to that. And the practical cooperation in the Arctic is thriving and is developing very fast. And the best example of that is the developing of the Arctic Council. And recently, under the very important Canadian chairmanship that we now have in the Arctic Council, there are a lot of very important projects going on that can signify this progress. And among them, I would simply notice the decision of the Arctic states to create the Arctic Economic Council. A council that will enhance the economic cooperation in the Arctic, bearing in mind all the delicacies that exist in the Arctic, and all the balances that will need to be observed. But creating new business opportunities for the businesses and for the regions of the Arctic. China is a very important observer, new observer to the Arctic Council, and Russia was happy to join our Arctic partners to take this decision. China is a huge market, China is a huge source of investment, and China is one of the best natural winner from the changes in the Arctic. And first of all, I mean the opening up of the new resources, hydrocarbon resources of the Arctic, and the new transportation routes, and I mean, first of all, the Northern Sea route. Russia enjoys excellent relations with the People's Republic of China, and the recent visit of President Putin to China was yet another example of that. In the statement that President Putin and Chairman Xi Jinping has signed in Shanghai, it was specifically mentioned that both sides will work together to create better conditions for maritime transportation through the Northern Sea route. And the more Chinese presence on the Northern Sea route is something which is welcomed by Russia, and I think by all, and I think by itself, as President Grímsson has put very correctly, that by itself, even from the economic point of view, will be a major change in the landscape of the region. I congratulate all the participants of the Symposium with a very good idea of establishing this kind of cooperation between China and Nordic states. This is, I think, something that should be not only mutually rewarding, but it's an important undertaking in a broader international context. Arctic is the zone of peace and cooperation, and I think that this project that you are partners of will be an important contribution to this reality. I wish you all a very successful and very fruitful seminar. It's important because despite all the changes and all the preconditions, all the precursors that seem to be lying on the table, the progress of cooperation in the Arctic will not be automatic. It will require the better understanding of the changes, better consulting of the governments, and better cooperation and involvement of the governments of all the parties concerned. And only through these united endeavors we can reach we can use the possibilities that are opened in the Arctic. At the end, I would like to thank also the Icelandic friends, and I see here so many Icelandic friends here who have extended me a very warm welcome in Reykjavik, and I just want to assure you that in my new capacity I will do my best to move forward bilateral relations between the Russian Federation and the Republic of Iceland, as well as try to go on moving forward the international Arctic cooperation. And I also hope that the Arctic Circle too this year will be a no less success than it was last year. Thank you very much and good luck.